The search for a tourist submarine continues after it went missing over the weekend while on an expedition to explore the famous Titanic shipwreck. The submersible, named the Titan, is owned by a company called OceanGate Expeditions and is said to be carrying 5 people on board, including the OceanGate CEO. Now, banging sounds were detected yesterday morning in the Atlantic Ocean during the search. What does a search of this magnitude entail is just one of the many questions we're asking this morning. Let's get some expert opinion. We're joined this morning by oceanographer and National Sea Rescue Institute volunteer, Dr Marc de Vos. Marc, it's great to see you. Thanks very much for coming onto the program. It is such an incredible story. I don't work in the field, but just reading the details of the expedition itself, what it takes to get down to those depths, 4 kilometers down to the Titanic shipwreck. When you first heard the details of the story and the fact that the submersible had gone missing, what went through your mind?
Yeah, good morning, Michelle. Thanks for having me. I think at the outset, I must just say that as members of the search and rescue community, our thoughts are first and foremost with those on board the sub, as well as their families, and then our colleagues from the broader search and rescue community who are involved in the search. But yeah, of course, it's kind of one of those once-in-a-lifetime sorts of cases. My initial impression was just how complex and how difficult the rescue operation was going to be, the search and rescue operation. And I must say that in my experience, a mobilization on the scale that we've seen, across the time frame that we've seen and with all the logistical complexities involved, in my opinion, incredible. And really, I must commend the efforts of all of those involved. I think it's been truly phenomenal.
Yeah. Having said that, experts have said, that getting together a search and rescue operation of this nature ordinarily would take weeks, if not months, certainly not 48 hours.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, in the normal day-to-day scientific world, mobilizations of that scale could take anywhere from 2 to 5 years to plan. I think that's what's been so surprising to all of us who've worked in deep ocean research operations, is just how quickly they've put together this team. And it's not just a case of one team mobilizing multiple assets, it's coordination across countries and across language barriers and across sort of workflows. So that certainly is the most surprising and most commendable achievement, I think, is just how they've managed to do it so quickly when normally certainly it takes years to plan something of that nature.
Let's talk a bit more about deep ocean exploration and, the capabilities that we have in 2023 of exploring the ocean at those depths, Marc. It's no joke, isn't it? I mean, I was reading something that talked about a NATO submarine that has the ability to go up to 300 meters into the ocean. We're talking 4 kilometers down to the Titanic wreck.
Yes, absolutely. So I keep hearing, how can this happen in this day and age? And what I think most people don't realize is that the deep ocean remains a tremendously challenging environment. During research expeditions, which I say are often planned at intervals of years in advance, there's still a lot of trepidation involved with sending equipment down to great depths, and there's always relief when things work as they should. It's definitely still a sort of frontier which challenges our modern technology. It's certainly not the case that deep ocean exploration is as operationally mature as commercial aviation, for example.
Sending technology down to those depths, you're saying, is no joke. I can imagine that sending people down to those depths is a mammoth task.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't have much experience with sending humans down to those depths. I've worked with some colleagues who have worked in that industry, particularly the sort of expedition tourism industry. And certainly it adds, layers of complexity on top of what is already quite a challenging undertaking. So certainly it definitely complicates everything.
So let's talk about what it takes to look for a missing vessel of this size in the Atlantic. I saw a comparison that talked about this being like looking for something the size of a pea on a football field using a magnifying glass. What does it take to find a missing Titan sub in the Atlantic?
Yeah, that's quite a good analogy. I like that one. There are various ones. The first thing to know is that it's incredibly complex. So even for a somewhat more routine surface search, you would need to know the last known position, and you would hope to have a good estimate of the last known position, and of course the time at which the target that you're looking for was at that position. You have to take into effect environmental factors, winds, waves, currents. You have to know the drift characteristics of the target. So if the wind is blowing at 60 kilometers per hour, how fast is the target going to drift based on its shape and its weight and so on. You need to know something about the behavior of the vessel or the vehicle. So is it drifting freely? Is it entangled? Is it perhaps actively trying to move to safety? And all of those factors give you a search area. And of course, this is happening in 3 dimensions, not only the surface. And then once you've determined your search area, you need to figure out what to do in that area. So the sorts of patterns that you cover that area with are based on what you're looking for. How visible is it from the surface? Do you need to space your tracks very closely together, or is it larger and you can get away with running more infrequent lines? And so I like to say that, we have a lot of modern technology, and the search and rescue industry has come a heck of a long way. But to a certain extent in these cases, it's almost more of an art, or not more of an art, but there's certainly a little bit of an art to getting this right.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of analogies around. One that I like as well is that, and it sort of gives a sense of the nature of a search like this. It talks about the deep ocean being almost like another planet. It's like it's sort of not exactly Earth as we know it. It is an entirely different world down there.
Yes, absolutely. I think the challenge to our technology, it shares that with outer space. I think just how few people have been there, I think it's got that in common with it as well. And I think, in terms of how difficult it is to reach there if something goes wrong. So certainly at least 3 very strong similarities to outer space.
So now the countdown continues as it's been counting down over the past couple of days since this vessel went missing on Sunday. According to the calculations of some experts, they're saying there are now just mere hours left before this vessel does run out of oxygen. So I suppose now the difficulty becomes, if indeed it is sitting on the ocean floor, is there enough oxygen to then bring it back up to the surface and to rescue the 5 individuals that are still on board?
Yes, so I think it's very difficult to talk specifics without detailed working knowledge of the operation and, what was on board exactly. I think what I would say is that search and rescue is fundamentally a hopeful endeavor. That's kind of a guiding principle for search and rescue. And so I'm certain that all the operators who are involved will be working from that perspective, and we certainly hope along with them that we'll see a positive outcome.
Praying for a miracle, effectively. Mark, I'm sure you've been reading all of the other sort of coverage around this vessel itself. Just given your knowledge of the industry, were you surprised that this was a vessel that was going on an expedition of this nature, going to see the Titanic wreckage 4 kilometers in deep ocean without having any of the regulatory approvals? I mean, this was included in the waiver that these passengers were made to sign.
Yeah, so I don't have detailed knowledge, like I say, of their operational plans and so on, and I'm not a submersible pilot myself. I've worked alongside some of these people before. I think the people that would be qualified to speak to that would be deep sea engineers with knowledge of the specific design. What I would say is that, the use of off-the-shelf technology is not by itself problematic. It's always simply a question of whether the equipment and the kit is fit for purpose. Now, it may or may not be, but it takes a proper assessment to determine that. And, something else that I would say is that in general, the more frequent use of everyday technology in specialist operations, which we're seeing, isn't necessarily the result of those operations dumbing down. Rather, it's due to that sort of technology previously having only been accessible to specialists, whereas it's now more available to the general public. And we see this with drones and mobile technology, for example. So I think without detailed knowledge of the operation, it's difficult to say.
Yeah, absolutely. As time continues to run out, one can just imagine how that rescue operation is trying to use the remaining time to the best use of trying to ensure the best outcome here. What an incredible story. Marc de Vos, let me thank you for your time this morning. He is an oceanographer and a volunteer with the NSRI.